All right, that's California Congressman, the chair of the House Oversight Government Reform Committee, Darrell Issa, and this new information that we discussed last week of the scandal going far deeper than rogue agents in Cincinnati on the IRS scandal. And the congressman joins us back. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Sean, and I want to thank you for continuing to cover an important issue, one in which my ranking member said the case was over and closed, but perhaps would like to reconsider his position after Carter Hall's testimony.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Hull, and let's talk about the chain of command, and let's talk about what we were originally told and how that is now proven factually inaccurate.
Well, I think the important point is exactly that. People wanted to say these were rogue agents in Cincinnati. We've now had testimony, transcribed interviews, and live testimony of virtually all the individuals in Cincinnati. And to a person, they said and showed us they were not rogue, but in fact waiting on guidance from Washington, which they were told to wait for, that never came.
Yeah, and all of this went up a chain of command directly to the political appointee of President Obama, did it not?
Well, exactly. There were only two authorized political appointees in the IRS, the commissioner and the chief counsel, and this went to the consul's office.
Well, then one has to ask the question, did he do this all on his own, which I'm sure is going to be the next level of deceit or argument, or was there anybody in the White House actively involved, considering this was a political appointment?
Well, Sean, that's exactly what we need to do, and we're doing is we're going through a series of additional interviews, asking those lawyers in the consul's office specific questions to find out where it leads from them and whether it leads outside of the IRS over to some other political office or whether the decision was made there. Additionally, Lois Lerner is another key point, and our intention is to have her back.
Okay, so where do we stand on the Lois Lerner issue, invoking the Fifth?
Well, as you know, our committee has voted that she did not properly invoke the Fifth, that clearly she waived those rights, and we're going to have her back based on that basis, that very clearly, according to council guidelines, this is House council guidelines, and the vote of the committee, she waived her Fifth Amendment.
Yeah, she gave a speech, and then she said, I invoke my Fifth Amendment rights after she gave her speech.
Well, and specifically a speech where she went item by item. Many of the things she said are exactly the questions we'd like to ask her. So, Sean, when I have her back, one of the things I plan on doing is taking her answers, putting the question that goes with it, and seeing if she'll give me the same answer again. She was under oath. She was there pursuant to a subpoena, and she did make these statements, and now conveniently would like to not answer questions, not just about this, but about all of her official conduct, including these hundreds of applications that, in no small part because of her, languished.
What if she pleads the Fifth again? Will she be held in contempt of Congress? And if so, what would that mean?
Well, it's certainly one of our tools, but Sean, sadly, and you know this from Fast and Furious, contempt is a tool that the administration has pled in court, in federal court, is of no value because what they're saying is the court has no ability to arbitrate these differences. And, you know, for your listeners who remember Fast and Furious, the only reason you're not hearing more and we're not discovering more is this administration has said, forget about Nixon having to turn over his tapes a generation ago. We don't have to do anything because the court can't order us because they don't have standing. A federal judge has to decide that absurd question. Once she does, our expectation is we'll move forward with successful discovery.
Well, it's a lot different than the most transparent administration in history, I'll tell you that. I mean, because you've been stonewalled on many of these investigations, have you not? We learned this week about Benghazi, which you've been also digging into, and I don't know how you keep track of them at this point, but we learned this week that, in fact, a non-disclosure agreement is preventing all these people from talking, people that went to Walter Reed and Bethesda and other hospitals under aliases?
Well, exactly. The deliberate opaqueness of even things that are so straightforward as to get to the bottom of Benghazi does fly in the face of this whole idea that this is the most transparent administration. But we are getting through it. We do keep track of it. We continue. But as you know, even Ambassador Pickering, a well-respected, long-standing ambassador, had to be brought by subpoena, which is unconscionable and certainly something that we were sad had to happen when he wouldn't give us testimony as to his official conduct in the investigation that we now see as insufficient, both in what it looked into and certainly insufficient on who it held accountable. accountable.
What about this concept of separation of powers and co-equal branches of government? Isn't the purpose of that and a government oversight committee, isn't your design to be able to look into this to see that there is not too much power or an abuse of power by the executive branch, or that the American people aren't being lied to, like in a couple of these instances? And
Sean, I couldn't have said it better. The balance of power, the question of whether we keep one branch from becoming excessive, just as the president's veto pen is intended to keep the House from becoming excessive. These are really teetering. And right now, with a president who, when he can't legislate, goes to regulatory decisions, in other words, he'll regulate out from underneath what would have been the intent of Congress, or now, more recently, use of executive order. And to rein this in, we need transparency. And quite frankly, we need the president to understand that the courts and the Congress have a role in the Constitution that is co-equal to his.
Yeah. So where do we stand with all of these? Obviously, going back to Fast and Furious, the IRS scandal, Benghazi, and other scandals, where do we stand? What is the status of all of this? Are you just in kind of treading water, waiting to get information, waiting for the courts to respond, waiting to, what do you do when the Attorney General lies before Congress, as he did 2 times? Are there any consequences for that? Because I imagine if I did the same thing, then why do I imagine myself in handcuffs, being perp-walked and put in jail?
Well, you would imagine yourself there. You are not above the law, but at the present time, the Attorney General seems to be beyond the reach of, I guess, his own law. We're not treading water, though. We're not in any way standing still. We continue to do depositions. We continue to get discovery of information. And when we're blocked at one entrance, a little bit like that wind-up toy that you used to let loose, and every time it would hit a wall, it would pivot and go somewhere else. If we can't get through one wall, we go around and we get it. And thanks to whistleblowers, we are getting a lot of information on plenty of wrongdoing, including the multiple areas of IRS and some other emerging areas, even at the Department of Energy and other places.
How many times do you feel you have been lied to, that you know provable lies that have been told by administration officials?
Well, it's certainly double digit. And, the definition of lie around here is one where you always have to say someone's disingenuous, somebody is less than truthful. But you look at the amount of times in which people from this administration have come before Congress and deliberately misled, it probably equals more than half of all the times they've come before Congress. It has been awful dealing with this administration when it comes to their ability to mislead or to fail to disclose. And often that's almost as bad. When you have an IRS commissioner who comes and says one thing and just a couple days later should have corrected the record and doesn't, that serves no purpose other than to deceive Congress. So on the continuum from failure to tell the truth, failure to fully disclose, to outright lie, this administration has really racked up a score in the probably hundreds, if you could include all the committees.
Do you think at the end of the day, because I think the American people need answers to these very important questions, do you think at the end of the day you'll be able to siphon through all this clutter and all this obfuscation and all these delay tactics and get to the truth? And do you think we'll get a full report on all these issues?
You will. Sean, I won't quit. I will stay on this until we get full answers in every area. And we're a permanent body. I'm coming back. I'm going to keep coming back until I get it. In some cases, we'll get the story while the president's still in the White House. In some cases, we'll be getting to the rest of the truth, even as he's packing his bags to go to his library. We will still be making sure the American people get the record straight so that they know how to deal with the reforms that Congress and others have to make.
It's pretty unbelievable that this is where we find ourselves as a country. But you feel on the issue of Benghazi that we were deceived and lied to. You feel on the issue of the IRS we were deceived and lied to. You feel on Fast and Furious we were deceived and lied to.
At a minimum, all three. There's no question at all. And in the case of the IRS, they sometimes say the truth and a lie at the same time because they'll say how awful it is, how unacceptable it is, and then they'll want to sweep it under the rug as though there's nothing there or it's case closed. In the case of the IRS, we've got to not just get to the bottom of what happened, but we've got to put safeguards in to make sure it doesn't happen again. As you know, the IRS is doing a mass growth under Obamacare, and they're going to be disseminating your Social Security number, your information, to every state in the union that has an exchange. It's going to be a vast expansion of the IRS's tentacles and your personal information be potentially available to people who shouldn't have it.
Can you imagine? So our medical records now, our private personal medical records are in jeopardy too.
They can be, and we have real questions about the contracts that are underway that will kick off in a matter of days of whether or not they're prepared to safeguard your records. And the evidence from our hearing shows they're not ready any more there than they were on the employer mandate, and it's the reason that the House has voted to take the individual mandate and postpone it the same amount of time. And candidly, these exchanges need to be postponed for at least a year if they're even ever going to be ready to be stood up.
All right, Congressman Issa, thanks for this update. We'll continue to follow them as the rest of the media ignores it and has moved on. We'll stay on it as you do. Thank you so much for staying vigilant on this.